The stars were dying one by one. Commander Tejo stood on the bridge of Keth Prime's orbital station and watched another distant sun flicker out. The void swarm had reached the Altair system. In 3 days, maybe 4, they would be here. He closed his eyes and tried not to think about the billions of lives that had just ended. "Sir, Dr. Somin is here to see you," his aide said quietly. Tejo turned as the Valari scientist entered the bridge. Dr. Somin looked tired. Her blue skin had lost its usual glow, and her large black eyes seemed empty. She had been studying the void swarm for 3 cycles now, ever since they first appeared at the galaxy's edge. "Any good news?" Tejo asked, though he already knew the answer. Somin shook her head. "The Nexus worlds fell yesterday. The crystalline people tried to hide in their deep caves, but the swarm found them. They convert everything organic into their machines. Nothing stops them." Through the bridge windows, Tejo could see the refugee ships floating around Keth Prime like lost children. Thousands of different species had come here, hoping this fortress world could protect them. The ethereals, who used to float like clouds between stars, now lived in metal boxes because their gas forms could not escape the swarm's conversion beams. The proud Valari, once masters of telepathy, kept their minds closed in fear that the swarm might hear their thoughts. "What about the final protocol?" Tejo asked. Somin's face grew even sadder. "The Council is meeting about it now. If we use it, every piece of technology in 100 light-years will stop working. That includes our life support, our ships, everything. We would all die, but so would the swarm." Captain Jinwoo walked over from the communication station. His young face looked older than his 28 years. "At least it would stop them from spreading further," he said. "Maybe some other part of the galaxy could survive." The 3 of them stood in silence. Outside, children from a dozen different species played in the refugee camps, not understanding that these might be their last days. Their parents watched with hollow eyes, trying to smile for the little ones. "Sir," the communications officer's voice cut through their dark thoughts. "We're getting strange readings from the edge of the system." Tejo hurried to the sensor station. "What kind of readings?" "Unknown ships, sir. They just appeared out of quantum space. The energy signatures don't match any known species." On the main screen, dozens of ships became visible. They were different from Alliance vessels, more angular with strange markings on their hulls. The largest ship was massive, almost as big as Keth Prime's main defense platform. "Are they swarm ships?" Jinwoo asked, his hand moving to the weapons controls. "No, sir," the sensor operator said. "These are definitely organic crews. I'm reading life signs, but they're strange. Very dense bone structure, high metal content in their blood." A communication signal came through. The voice that spoke was clear and strong, using the common galactic language with a strange accent. "This is Admiral Hai Jin of the Earth Defense Fleet, aboard the battleship Dauntless. We received your distress call and have come to help. Please respond." Tejo looked at Somin and Jinwoo. None of them had heard of this Earth before. "This is Commander Tejo of Keth Prime Defense Command," he replied. "We welcome any help, but I must warn you. The Void Swarm will be here in days. They have destroyed entire civilizations. If you value your lives, you should leave now." There was a pause. Then the voice came back with what sounded like laughter. "Commander, we didn't come all this way to run from a fight. Request permission to dock and meet with your leadership." 2 hours later, Tejo stood in the main docking bay with Dr. Somin and Captain Jinwoo. The alien ship that approached was smaller than their usual diplomatic vessels, but it moved with deadly grace. When it landed, the airlock opened with a sharp hiss. The beings that stepped out looked almost like Valari, but heavier and stranger. They walked on 2 legs and had 2 arms, but their skin was a pale color that reminded Tejo of some fungi. Their eyes were small and came in different colors: brown, blue, green. Hair grew from the tops of their heads in various shades. The leader, a female with short black hair and dark eyes, stepped forward. She wore a blue uniform with strange symbols on it. "I'm Admiral He Jin," she said. "Thank you for meeting with us." Dr. Somin stepped forward, her scientist's curiosity overcoming her fear. "Forgive me, Admiral, but what species are you? Your biological readings are unlike anything in our databases." "We're humans," He Jin said simply. "We come from a planet called Earth. It's about 200 light-years from here." "Just one planet?" Jinwoo asked, surprised. "The Alliance represents thousands of worlds, and we barely slowed the swarm down. How can one world help us?" Admiral Hyojin smiled, and there was something in that smile that made Taeho's skin crawl, not with fear but with a strange kind of hope. Captain, you'd be surprised what one world can do when that world spends every day trying to kill everything that lives on it. Dr. So-min's eyes went wide. You come from a death world? We just call it home, another human said. This one was male, with scars on his face and hands that spoke of many battles. I'm Colonel Namgil. We brought 37 ships and about 15,000 Marines. Not much by your standards, I'm sure, but we're here to help. Taeho felt something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. These humans seemed so calm, so confident. They talked about fighting the swarm like it was just another day's work. Admiral, he said carefully, the Void Swarm has converted entire star systems. They turn all organic matter into machines that serve their hive mind. They learn from every battle and adapt to our weapons. What makes you think you can succeed where the greatest civilizations in the galaxy have failed? Admiral Hyojin looked at him with those dark eyes, and when she spoke, her voice was filled with something that Taeho had almost forgotten existed. Commander, she said, you've been fighting the swarm like civilized beings. You use logic, strategy, and honor. That's why you're losing. The swarm understands logic. It can adapt to strategy, but there's one thing it will never understand. What's that? So-min asked. The Admiral's smile grew wider, and Taeho saw something wild and dangerous in her eyes. Something that spoke of a world that had forged its children in fire and pain and made them into something the galaxy had never seen before. It will never understand what happens when you corner. Something that evolved on a world where everything wants to kill it, she said. It's about to learn why we call ourselves the children of Earth. As if summoned by her words, alarms began to sound throughout the station. The Void Swarm had arrived early. The real fight was about to begin. The command center buzzed with activity as reports flooded in from the outer sensors. Captain Jinwoo read them aloud, his voice tight with stress. Void Swarm scout fleet detected at system edge. 12 ships moving in standard search pattern. They'll reach the outer planets in 6 hours. Admiral Hyojin stood next to Commander Taeho at the tactical display, studying the enemy positions with calm eyes. Her human officers surrounded her. Colonel Namgil, Captain Subin, and others whose names Taeho was still learning. They all shared the same strange calmness, as if facing an enemy that had destroyed civilizations was just another day at work. Tell me about these scouts. Hyojin said to Dr. So-min. The Valari scientist pulled up holographic displays showing the swarm ships. They looked like metal insects, all sharp angles and glowing energy conduits. They probe ahead of the main fleet, So-min explained. They scan for defensive positions, population centers, anything useful to convert. When they find resistance, they adapt and report back to the hive mind. How do they adapt? Asked Captain Subin, a young human woman with bright eyes. They learn from every weapon fired at them, every tactic used against them. By the time the main fleet arrives, they know exactly how to counter our defenses. Admiral Hyojin nodded slowly. And you've been fighting them the same way every time, with logic and strategy. Of course, Taeho said, confused. How else would you fight a war? The humans looked at each other, and Colonel Namgil chuckled. Admiral, I think these folks have never met anyone from a death world before. What exactly is a death world? Dr. So-min asked, her scientific curiosity overcoming the crisis. Admiral Hyojin gestured to one of her officers. Pilot Donghyun, why don't you show Dr. So-min your medical scans from the ship's computer? A young human male stepped forward and placed his hand on the scanner. The results that appeared made everyone in the room go silent. This is impossible, Dr. So-min whispered, staring at the readings. Your bone density is 3 times that of a Valari. Your muscle fibers are wound so tight they should tear under normal movement. And your blood. There's so much iron content it should poison you. Earth has heavy gravity, Donghyun said with a shrug, and the air has more oxygen than most worlds can handle. Plus there's the radiation from our sun, the toxic plants, the predators that hunt in packs, the diseases that adapt faster than medicine can keep up. How do you survive? Jinwoo asked, amazed. We don't just survive, Colonel Namgil said. We thrive. Every human child grows up knowing that the world wants to kill them. It makes us hard to kill and harder to predict. Dr. So-min was still studying the medical data. Your healing rate is incredible. This says you can recover from injuries that would kill most species, and your psychological profile. The stress tolerance levels are off the charts. Pain is just weakness leaving the body, Captain Subin said with a grin. That's what we learned in training. Admiral Hyejin looked at the tactical display. Commander Teho, we need to capture one of those scout ships intact. Can your people create a distraction while we board one? Board one? Teho stared at her. Admiral, those ships are filled with toxic gases and radiation. The corridors are designed to kill any organic life that enters. Even if you got inside, the swarm warriors are machines. They feel no pain, no fear, and they're faster than any living being. Sounds like fun, Pilot Dong-hyun said. When do we start? Dr. So-min stepped forward. Wait, I need to understand this. Are you really planning to board a swarm ship with just your physical bodies? No protective suits? No special weapons? We'll take some basic gear, Colonel Nam-gil said. Breathing apparatus, some standard weapons. But mostly we rely on what Earth gave us. Which is what exactly? Jinwoo asked. Admiral Hyejin's smile was sharp as a blade. The ability to keep fighting when any sane being would lie down and die. 3 hours later, Teho watched from the command center as the human plan unfolded. It was madness, pure, brilliant madness. The Alliance fleet moved in perfect formation, drawing the swarm scouts toward the main defensive line. The enemy ships took the bait, moving to engage what looked like a standard defensive posture. But while the scouts focused on the obvious threat, a single human ship, small, fast, and flying in patterns that made no tactical sense, approached from an impossible angle. How are they doing that? Jinwoo asked, watching the human ship dance between the swarm's energy beams. Those maneuvers should kill the crew. High-gravity world, Dr. So-min said, understanding beginning to dawn in her voice. They can handle acceleration that would crush us. The human ship slammed into the side of a swarm scout like a predator taking down prey. Metal sparked and atmosphere vented as the two ships locked together. Boarding successful, came Dong-hyun's voice over the radio. Beginning internal sweep. What happened next would be talked about in Alliance databases for generations. Through the ship's sensors, they could hear the sounds of combat inside the swarm vessel. But it wasn't the quick, efficient destruction they expected. It was long, brutal, and filled with sounds that machines shouldn't make. Status report. Admiral Hyejin called. Corridor 1 secured, Dong-hyun reported, breathing hard. These machine things are tough, but they're not ready for someone who won't stay down when hit. Dr. So-min listened to the sounds of battle with growing amazement. She could hear metal being torn apart, the distinctive sound of swarm energy weapons and something else, something that sounded almost like singing. Is that pilot singing while he fights? She asked. Colonel Nam-gil nodded. Old Earth battle song. Helps keep the blood flowing and the fear away. Fear? Jinwoo looked confused. I thought you said humans don't feel fear. Oh, we feel it, Captain Subin said. We just don't let it stop us. Fear keeps you alive on a death world. It makes you faster, stronger, more alert. You learn to use it instead of being used by it. The sounds of battle continued for another 20 minutes. When Dong-hyun's voice came back over the radio, he sounded tired but triumphant. Ship secured. The machine things are down but not destroyed. They seem to be in some kind of shutdown mode. I'm downloading their data cores now. Any injuries? Admiral Hyejin asked. Nothing major. Few broken ribs, some cuts, a dislocated shoulder. I'll be fine in a week or two. Dr. So-min stared at the radio in shock. A week or two? Those injuries should take months to heal if they heal at all. Death world, Colonel Nam-gil said again, as if that explained everything. When Dong-hyun returned to the command center, he was walking under his own power despite injuries that should have left him unconscious. He carried a data core in one hand and had a wild grin on his face. Admiral, he said, handing over the device, these machines are smart, but they think in straight lines. They didn't know what to do when I started fighting in ways that didn't make sense. Dr. So-min took the data core with trembling hands. This is the first intact swarm intelligence we've ever captured. The information here could change everything. Admiral Hyejin nodded, but her eyes were already on the tactical display. Good. Because according to our long-range sensors, the main swarm fleet just entered the system. 300 ships, including their flagship. The room went quiet. 300 ships was more than the Alliance had faced in any single battle. How long until they reach us? Teho asked. 12 hours, Jinwoo reported. Admiral Hyejin looked around the room at the scared faces of the Alliance officers, then at her own calm, confident humans. 12 hours, she repeated. Perfect. That gives us just enough time to show you how humans really fight a war. Dr. So-min looked at the data core in her hands. then at the humans who had just done the impossible. For the first time in 3 cycles, she felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. The children of the Death World had arrived, and they were nothing like anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Void Swarm was about to learn what happened when predators met something that had been forged by a world of predators. The real battle was still coming, but now the Alliance had something they never had before: allies who didn't know how to give up. The Void Swarm main fleet dropped out of quantum space like a metal storm. Commander Tejo had seen the enemy before, but never this many ships at once. They stretched across space in perfect formation, 300 vessels of death and conversion, led by a flagship the size of a small moon. All defensive positions. Prepare for battle, he ordered into his communicator. Around Keth Prime, Alliance ships moved into their carefully planned defensive lines. Every tactic had been tested, every strategy calculated for maximum efficiency. Dr. So-Min stood beside him, studying the data from the captured scout ship. The Swarm's battle computers have already analyzed our defensive positions, she reported. They know exactly how we're going to fight. Captain Jinwoo looked up from his station. Their ships are moving to counter our standard tactics. They're adapting before the battle even starts. Admiral Hyejin stood calmly at the center of the chaos, watching the enemy approach. Her human officers surrounded her, Colonel Namgil checking weapon systems, Captain Subin reviewing boarding plans, and pilot Dong Hyun, still bandaged from his scout ship adventure, preparing his fighter squadron. Admiral, Tejo said, the Swarm knows our every move. They've seen these tactics 1,000 times across the galaxy. How can we possibly win? Hyejin smiled that dangerous smile that Tejo was beginning to recognize. Commander, you're still thinking like a civilized being. The Swarm knows how civilized species fight, with honor, logic, and rules. But we're not civilized. Before Tejo could ask what she meant, the Swarm attacked. Their first wave came in perfect formation, energy beams cutting through space with mathematical precision. The Alliance fleet responded exactly as their training dictated. Organized defensive lines, coordinated fire patterns, strategic retreats to prepared positions. It was exactly what the Swarm expected. Alliance ships began falling within minutes. The enemy had studied their tactics for 3 cycles and knew how to counter every move. Despair began to spread through the defensive fleet as ship after ship was destroyed or converted. Then the humans joined the battle. What they did couldn't be called tactics. It couldn't even be called strategy. It was chaos with purpose, madness with method. Captain Subin's destroyer came screaming out of nowhere, not at the Swarm's weapons but directly at their flagship. Her ship spun and twisted through space in patterns that should have torn it apart, avoiding energy beams by margins so small they were almost touching. What is she doing? Jinwoo shouted. That's suicide. No, Dr. So-Min said, watching in amazement. She's confusing their targeting computers. The Swarm can't predict her movements because they don't make tactical sense. Subin's ship slammed into the flagship's hull and stuck there like a parasite. Through the communications, they could hear her crew laughing as they began cutting through the enemy's armor. Phase 1 complete, Subin reported cheerfully, beginning aggressive boarding procedures. More human ships joined the fight and each one fought differently. Colonel Namgil's heavy cruiser used its own hull as a weapon, ramming Swarm vessels at full speed while his crew somehow survived impacts that should have liquefied them. Pilot Dong Hyun led his fighters in attack patterns that looked like a swarm of angry insects, striking from every direction at once. Their acceleration tolerance is impossible, Jinwoo said, staring at his sensors. Those pilots are pulling 20 Gs and still fighting effectively. Deathworld, Dr. So-Min whispered, beginning to understand. They evolved on a planet that tried to kill them every day. Their bodies can handle stresses that would destroy us. But it wasn't just their physical abilities that made them dangerous. It was how they thought. Admiral Hyejin's voice came over the fleet communications, calm and clear despite the chaos around her. All human units, implement Tactic 7. Tejo had never heard of Tactic 7. Neither, apparently, had the Swarm. The human ships suddenly stopped fighting like a fleet and started fighting like a pack of hunters. They moved in seemingly random patterns, striking at unexpected targets, then disappearing before the Swarm could respond. When one human ship was damaged, others would rush to its aid, not with careful rescue operations, but with pure aggressive fury. They're not following any military doctrine, Tejo said, watching the battle unfold. They're fighting like wild animals. That's exactly what they're doing, Colonel Namgil's voice came over the radio. He sounded like he was having the time of his life. The swarm knows how to fight armies, fleets, and civilizations, but it doesn't know how to fight a pack. The tide of battle began to turn. For the first time since the war began, swarm ships were retreating. Their logical minds couldn't process what they were seeing. Every time they adapted to counter one human tactic, the humans changed to something completely different. Captain Subin's voice crackled through the communications from inside the enemy flagship. I'm in their central processor room. These machines are very polite. They keep asking me to surrender in 17 different languages. What did you tell them? Admiral Haijin asked. I taught them a new human phrase, Subin replied. The sound of explosions echoed in the background. I told them to go to hell. The enemy flagship shuddered as internal explosions tore through its core systems. Other human boarding parties had reached their targets too, and swarm ships across the battlefield began to malfunction as their control systems were sabotaged from within. Dr. So-min watched the impossible battle with growing excitement. They're not just fighting the swarm, she realized. They're breaking its ability to learn. Every time it tries to adapt, they do something completely irrational. Is irrationality a human battle tactic? Jinwoo asked. Everything is a human battle tactic, Admiral Haijin said, appearing beside them. She had somehow moved from her command ship to the command center without anyone noticing. We don't have the luxury of fighting fair. Our world never taught us how. The swarm's perfect formation was falling apart. Ships collided with each other as they tried to track human vessels that moved in impossible patterns. Their targeting computers overheated trying to process attack runs that violated every principle of space combat. But the humans weren't finished. All units, Admiral Haijin ordered. Implement the Crazy Ivan. What's a Crazy Ivan? Tejo asked. Yejin's grin was pure predator. Something we learned from fighting each other back on Earth. Watch. Every human ship in the battle suddenly reversed direction at maximum acceleration. They flew directly into the swarm formation, weapons firing in all directions using their own ships as guided missiles. The maneuver was so suicidal that the swarm's computers briefly shut down trying to understand why anyone would do such a thing. In that moment of confusion, the humans struck. Boarding parties landed on dozens of swarm ships simultaneously. Human Marines, led by sergeants like Jae-sung and Woo-jin, fought their way through toxic corridors and radiation-filled chambers, their enhanced biology letting them survive where other species would die. The swarm had never encountered an enemy that could board their ships and fight hand-to-hand against their mechanical warriors. They had never faced beings who got stronger when hurt, more dangerous when cornered, and more determined when facing impossible odds. Flagship is down, Captain Subin reported. Central Command destroyed. The swarm fleet is losing coordination. Without their central control, the individual swarm ships began to make mistakes. They fired on each other, crashed into asteroids, and flew in circles as their navigation systems failed to understand the chaos around them. Admiral Haijin watched the enemy fleet dissolve into confusion and turned to Commander Tejo. You see, Commander? The swarm is very intelligent, but intelligence isn't the same as wisdom. They know how to fight wars, but they don't know how to fight something that refuses to follow the rules. Dr. So-min looked at her scanners in amazement. The remaining swarm ships are retreating. They're actually running away. For the first time in 3 cycles, the Void Swarm had been defeated in open battle. Ships that had destroyed entire civilizations were fleeing from a force a tenth their size. Captain Jinwoo stared at the tactical display in shock. How is this possible? We've been fighting them for years and could barely slow them down. You defeated them in hours. Colonel Namgil, back from his ramming attacks with his ship held together by emergency welds and pure stubbornness, laughed. Son, you've been fighting them like they were your equals. But they're not our equals. They're just very sophisticated prey. The human officers began coordinating rescue operations and damage reports, but their mood was cheerful despite the destruction around them. They moved like people who had just finished a good day's work, not like warriors who had just faced extinction. Dr. So-min watched them with growing understanding. These beings from the death world didn't just refuse to give up. They literally didn't know how. Their planet had spent millions of years teaching them that survival was possible even when everything said it wasn't. Admiral, she said to Heejin, What you've done here will change everything. The other Alliance worlds need to know that the swarm can be beaten." Admiral Hyejin nodded, but her expression was serious. "This was just the advanced fleet, Doctor. According to our intelligence, the swarm's main force is 50 times larger. And now they know we exist." The message spread across the galaxy like wildfire. For the first time in 3 cycles, the Void Swarm had been defeated. Refugee fleets that had been hiding in dead systems and asteroid belts began moving toward Keth Prime. Hope, long thought dead, flickered back to life. Commander Teho stood in the rebuilt command center, watching the stream of ships arriving at their system. Valari meditation vessels, Nexus crystal ships, ethereal gas haulers, every surviving species was represented. But what amazed him most were the new human ships that kept appearing. "How many colonies does Earth have?" Dr. Somin asked Admiral Hyejin as another wave of human vessels dropped out of quantum space. 47 worlds, plus various stations and habitats," Hyejin replied. "Each one adapted to its local environment. You've only met our standard fleet crews so far. The ships that arrived were unlike anything in the Alliance databases. Some were sleek and fast, others looked like they were built to ram through asteroids. A few seemed to be more weapon than ship, bristling with guns and armor." "Incoming transmission from the heavy fleet," reported Captain Jinwoo. "It's Admiral Wu Jin from Titan Station." The figure that appeared on the main screen made everyone step back. Admiral Wu Jin was clearly human, but built like a living fortress. His bones were so dense they were visible through his skin, and his muscles moved like cables under tension. When he spoke, his voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Admiral Hyejin, good to see the standard fleet made it here safe. We brought the heavy boys and girls from the high-gravity worlds. Heard you had a pest problem." Behind him, Teho could see other humans that looked like they could punch through ship hulls with their bare hands. These were people who had grown up on worlds where gravity was 3 times Earth normal, where the air was so thick it was almost liquid. "Status report." "Wu Jin," Hyejin said. "Titan Station. New series and Gravity Well sent their full fleets. We've got about 200 ships with crews that can fight in environments that would crush standard humans, perfect for boarding actions against swarm vessels." Before Hyejin could respond, another transmission came in. This one showed a woman so pale she was almost transparent, with white hair and eyes like ice. When she spoke, her voice was calm and cold. "This is Commander Young-ho from the Polaris colonies," she said. "We represent the ice worlds and void stations. Our people can survive in hard vacuum and temperatures that would freeze other species solid. We're here to help." Dr. So-min watched the parade of human variants with growing amazement. "How many different types of humans are there?" "As many as there are hostile environments," Admiral Hyejin said. "Humanity spreads everywhere and we adapt to everything. Death worlds, ice worlds, high-gravity worlds, void stations. Wherever normal life can't survive, you'll find humans thriving." A third transmission interrupted them. The woman on screen had dark skin and eyes that seemed to glow with inner fire. Behind her, Teho could see other humans moving in perfect silence through what looked like a ship's engine room. "Major Mi-sun, representing the thermal worlds and solar station crews," she reported. "We're the ones who live near stars and in high radiation environments. Our ships can operate in conditions that would melt standard vessels." Captain Jinwoo looked at his sensor readings in disbelief. "There are over 800 human ships in the system now, and more arriving every hour. Each fleet is specialized for different types of warfare." "That's not even half of them," Admiral Hyejin said calmly. "The deep space nomad fleets are still traveling here, and the Garden World colonies are sending their support fleets." Commander Teho felt overwhelmed. How do you coordinate so many different types of humans? They must have completely different cultures, different ways of thinking. "Oh, we do," Admiral Hyejin said with a laugh. "The Ice Worlders think the thermal crews are crazy for living near stars. The heavy gravity people think the Voidborn are too fragile. The Garden Worlders think we're all barbarians. But we're all human, and we all remember Earth." Dr. So-min was studying her screens, watching the human ships organize themselves. "This is fascinating. Each fleet operates completely differently, but they're working together like they've done this before." "Pack hunting," said a new voice. Everyone turned to see a human officer they hadn't met before. She was tall and thin, with the pale complexion of someone who had never seen natural sunlight. "I'm Captain So-young from the Deep Void Stations. My people live in the empty spaces between stars." She moved to the tactical display and began highlighting ship positions. Humans learned to hunt in groups millions of years ago on Earth. The principle is the same whether you're hunting mammoth on the plains or swarm ships in space. Different pack members have different roles, but they all work toward the same goal. As if to prove her point, the human fleets began moving into position around Keth Prime. The heavy ships took positions where they could use their massive weapons and armor. The fast ships spread out to cover flanking routes. The Ice Worlders positioned themselves in the cold shadow zones where their ships operated best. Incoming message from long-range scouts, Jinwoo reported. The main swarm fleet has been detected. They're 3 days out and the size estimates are... He paused, checking his readings twice. 15,000 ships. The command center went silent. Even with all the human reinforcements, they were outnumbered nearly 10 to 1. Admiral Haijin looked around at the shocked faces and shrugged. Well, that's better than the usual odds humans face. At least this time we know they're coming. Dr. So-min stared at her. Admiral, how can you be so calm? 15,000 ships is more than has ever been assembled in one place. The swarm is sending everything they have. Good, said Admiral Wu Jin from his transmission. Means we can finish this in one battle instead of chasing them around the galaxy. Commander Young-ho's ice-cold voice added, My people once survived a solar flare that sterilized our entire system. We lived in caves under frozen oceans for 50 years until we could rebuild. 15,000 ships sounds like a fair fight. Major Mi-sun laughed, a sound like crackling fire. The thermal worlds have been preparing for this since we first heard about the swarm. Our ships are armed with solar flares contained in magnetic bottles. We've been wanting to test them on something. Captain So-young from the Void Station smiled quietly. My people know how to hide in empty space and strike without warning. The swarm won't see us coming until we're already inside their formation. As the human commanders planned their attack, Dr. So-min made a discovery that changed everything. The data from the captured scout ship had revealed something crucial about how the swarm operated. Admiral, she said urgently, I found something important. The swarm isn't just a hive mind, it's a single mind distributed across all their ships. They share consciousness through quantum links. What does that mean for us? Taiho asked. It means they think as one being, but they also feel as one being. If we can cause enough chaos, enough unpredictable input, we might be able to overload their collective consciousness. Admiral Haijin's eyes lit up with understanding. A feedback loop. If we hit them with enough irrational behavior, their shared mind might not be able to process it all. Exactly. But it would require a coordinated assault using tactics so chaotic and unpredictable that their central intelligence couldn't adapt fast enough. The human commanders looked at each other and began to grin. Coordinated chaos was exactly what humans did best. All fleet commanders, Admiral Haijin broadcast, prepare for Operation Madhouse. We're going to show the swarm what happens when you threaten a pack. Over the next 2 days, the human fleets prepared for battle in ways that defied all military logic. They practiced ramming maneuvers that should have been suicide, boarding tactics that relied on surviving in environments that would kill normal soldiers, and attack patterns that looked like controlled insanity. The Alliance forces watched in amazement as humans from ice worlds trained alongside humans from fire worlds, sharing techniques that shouldn't work for anyone but somehow worked for them. Void-born pilots taught heavy world marines how to fight in zero gravity, while thermal world engineers showed everyone how to turn their ships into guided bombs. They're not just planning to fight the swarm, Jinwoo observed. They're planning to confuse it to death. Dr. So-min nodded, watching the preparations. Each human variant brings something completely different to the battle. The swarm's computers will be trying to track ice ships that operate outside normal physics, heavy ships that can ram through anything, thermal ships that can survive inside a star, and void ships that appear from nowhere. Commander Taeho felt something he hadn't experienced since the war began. Excitement. Not just hope, but actual eagerness for the battle to come. Admiral, what can the Alliance forces do to help? Admiral Haijin smiled at him, and for the first time it wasn't the smile of a predator. It was the smile of someone welcoming a new pack member. Commander, you're going to learn to fight like humans. Dr. So-min, your people's telepathy could be crucial for coordinating the chaos. Captain Jinwoo, your fleet knows this system better than anyone. You'll guide our ships through the asteroid fields and gravity wells. As the swarm's massive fleet approached, the humans made their final preparations. Each variant, the Void Swarm's main fleet arrived like a plague of metal locusts, 15,000 ships stretched across space in perfect geometric patterns, their hulls gleaming with the converted matter of 100 destroyed worlds. At the center of the formation floated the Nexus, a ship the size of a small planet, built from the cores of conquered civilizations. Commander Tae-ho stood in the command center, watching the enemy approach. Even with all the human reinforcements, the odds were impossible. The Alliance had maybe 2,000 ships total, most of them damaged from years of running battles. Final positions confirmed, reported Captain Jinwoo. All fleets are in place. Around Keth Prime, the combined human and Alliance forces waited in seeming chaos. Iceworld ships hid in the cold shadows between asteroids. Heavy gravity vessels floated near the system's largest planet, using its mass to mask their signatures. Thermal world ships positioned themselves near the system's star, their heat signatures lost in the solar radiation. Dr. Somin worked frantically at her station, making final adjustments to the quantum disruptor they had built using captured swarm technology. If this works, we can break their hive mind connection. But someone needs to get this device to their central Nexus ship. I'll take it, said Captain So-young from the Void stations. Her pale face was calm as she studied the massive enemy formation. My ship can travel through empty space without being detected. We've done it before. Admiral Hyojin nodded. Remember, the goal isn't to win a traditional battle. We need to overload their collective consciousness with so much chaos that they can't process it all. The swarm fleet moved into attack formation, their ships flowing like liquid metal into precise positions. Their first wave began accelerating toward Keth Prime's defenses, energy weapons charging with deadly purpose. All units, Admiral Hyojin broadcast, Operation Madhouse is now active. Show them what humans learned on the Death World. What happened next would be studied by military historians for centuries, though most would conclude it was impossible and must have been exaggerated. Admiral Wu Jin's heavy gravity fleet attacked first, but not in any way the swarm expected. Instead of fighting at long range, they accelerated directly into the enemy formation at speeds that should have liquefied their crews. Their massive ships, built to withstand crushing gravity, rammed through swarm vessels like hammers through glass. Physics says this is impossible, Dr. Somin whispered, watching the heavy ships tear through the enemy lines. No organic crew should survive those impacts. High gravity world, Commander Tae-ho said, beginning to understand. Their bones are dense as metal, their bodies built to handle forces that would kill us. The swarm tried to adapt, turning their weapons on the ramming ships. But before they could lock on, Commander Young-ho's Iceworld fleet emerged from the asteroid shadows. Their ships moved through space at temperatures near absolute zero, their hulls radiating so little heat they were almost invisible to sensors. The ice ships struck like frozen lightning, appearing in the middle of the swarm formation and firing weapons that turned enemy hulls brittle with cold. When swarm ships tried to return fire, the ice vessels simply vanished back into the cold darkness between worlds. Temperature warfare, Jinwoo said in amazement. I've never seen anything like it. But the chaos was just beginning. Major Misun's thermal world fleet came screaming out of the star's corona, their ships glowing white-hot from exposure to solar radiation. They flew through space trailing fire, their weapons charged with the power of contained solar flares. When they fired, entire sections of swarm ships simply vaporized. The enemy tried to target them, but the thermal ships were already gone, diving back into the star's burning atmosphere where no other vessel could follow. How are they surviving inside a star? Dr. Somin asked. Thermal adaptation, Admiral Hyojin explained, watching her people work with pride. Humans from the solar worlds grow up in radiation that would cook other species. Their ships are built to swim through stellar fire. The swarm's perfect formation began to crumble as they tried to track enemies that operated outside normal physics. Their targeting computers overheated, attempting to predict movements that followed no logical pattern, but the humans weren't finished. Captain So-young's Void Station fleet materialized throughout the enemy formation like ghosts. One moment empty space, the next moment ships firing at point-blank range before disappearing again. The Void-born humans had learned to hide in the spaces between atoms, using quantum effects that other species barely understood. Stealth technology? Tae-ho asked. Better. So-young's voice came over the radio from somewhere inside the enemy fleet. We learned to become nothing. Hard to shoot what doesn't exist. The swarm's hive mind began to show signs of strain. Ships collided with each other as they tried to track too many impossible targets. Their central coordination started breaking down as their collective consciousness struggled to process attacks that violated everything they knew about space combat. "Now," Admiral Hyjin ordered. "All remaining fleets general attack." The rest of the human forces joined the battle, each group bringing their own brand of organized chaos. Garden World ships fought with weapons grown from plants that could eat through metal. Asteroid miners used their industrial equipment to literally take enemy ships apart. Deep space explorers attacked with tools designed to survive at the edge of known space. Dr. So-Min watched her screens in awe as the human forces tore through the swarm fleet. They're not just fighting, they're teaching the enemy that everything it knows about warfare is wrong. But the Nexus ship, the swarm's central intelligence, began to adapt. Its massive weapons turned toward the human fleets, energy beams that could destroy entire ships with a single shot. "The central nexus is too heavily defended," Captain So-Young reported. "I can't get close enough to deliver the disruptor." That's when pilot Dong Hyun's voice came over the radio, cheerful despite the chaos around him. "Captain, you're thinking like someone who needs to survive the mission." Before anyone could stop him, Dong Hyun's fighter broke from formation and screamed toward the Nexus ship. His small vessel dodged between massive energy beams, spinning and diving through fire that would have vaporized anything larger. "Dong Hyun, what are you doing?" Admiral Hyjin demanded. "Something stupid," he replied happily. "The best kind of human tactic." His fighter slammed into the Nexus ship's hull and stuck there like a tick on a beast. Through the communications, they could hear him cutting through the armor with tools not meant for that purpose. "I'm inside," he reported. "The hallways are full of poison gas and radiation, but I've got my breathing gear." "Oh, and Captain So-Young, I grabbed your disruptor device on the way out." What followed was the longest 20 minutes in galactic history. Through the ship's sensors, they could hear Dong Hyun fighting his way through the Nexus ship's defenses. Not with weapons or tactics, but with pure stubborn refusal to die. "Status report," Admiral Hyjin called. "Found the central processor," Dong Hyun panted. "These machine things really don't like visitors. I'm down to my backup plan, which is, hit things until they break." The sounds of destruction echoed through the communications as Dong Hyun fought his way to the swarm's central intelligence. When he finally reached the core, his voice was tired but triumphant. "Disruptor device is in place. You might want to cover your ears for this." The explosion that followed wasn't physical, it was quantum. The disruptor sent a cascade of chaotic information through the swarm's hive mind network. Every ship in their fleet suddenly received contradictory orders, impossible sensory input, and the collective experience of confusion from 15,000 different sources. The swarm's perfect coordination shattered like glass. Ships that had moved in harmony for 3 cycles suddenly forgot how to work together. Their central intelligence, faced with more chaos than it could process, simply shut down to protect itself. Across the battlefield, swarm ships went dead in space or began firing on each other. Some tried to retreat, others spun in circles, and a few simply exploded as their systems overloaded. "All ships," Admiral Hyjin ordered, "finish them." The human fleets moved through the disabled enemy vessels like wolves through a flock of sheep. But instead of simply destroying them, they did something unprecedented. They began converting the ships back to their original forms. Dr. So-Min watched in amazement as swarm vessels reverted to their pre-converted states. The quantum disruptor isn't just breaking their hive mind, it's reversing the conversion process. The absorbed civilizations are being freed. Across the galaxy, similar reversions began happening. Every world the swarm had converted, every population they had absorbed began returning to their original forms. Millions of beings who had been forced into the hive mind collective suddenly found themselves free again. "Dong Hyun," Admiral Hyjin called. "Status report." "Still alive," came the weak reply, though I think I used up about 7 of my 9 lives on this one. "The central AI is definitely dead. I can see its core processors melting. Can you get out?" "Working on it. Might take a while, though. These corridors weren't designed for visitors." 6 hours later, rescue teams finally extracted Dong Hyun from the wreckage of the Nexus ship. He was unconscious,